the Nikon MGX Pro versus the PowerA Moga xp7-x Plus. I'm Rio Gion and welcome to the channel. From the front of the controller, it looks very much like an Xbox One controller except stretched out tremendously. But besides that, you have your XBAY all in the same layout and in the same color scheme as an Xbox One controller. You have two legit analog sticks, not the Switch kinds, which are great. You have the D-pad, which looks pretty good. You also have the share and the three little dot buttons, the same thing as an Xbox controller. You have the home button, and this is the button where you turn on the controller, and that's pretty much for the front side. You got the two handlebars. You have this sort of like chrome ring around each analog stick to kind of up that premiumness to it. In the middle you have the Nikon logo, and then you also have the plastic sort of stripe pattern rubber pieces to hold the phone together, and then on the bottom you have like this little raised piece of plastic to keep the phone still, and it's gonna come in handy later on once you get the feel of the phone. Once you have a folding phone and you kind of place it down, this little piece of plastic actually does come in handy. So that's pretty much for the front. On the top side you have the L1, R1, L2, R2. The L2, R2 are actually linear. They are the ones where you press them harder, you go faster in racing games. That's the one you want. The L1, R1 are nice, big and chunky, and like gives you a lot of surface area when you press them. The two handlebars look great, but of course this is a pretty chunky controller. Like if you look at it just by itself, it seems like it's fine. It seems like it's small. Actually on video, it does not seem like it's that bad. But when you pull it up to something like, let's say the one that's the iPega that I'm gonna show you guys, right next to it, you're gonna see that giant size difference. This thing will dwarf that. This controller will eat the iPega every single day of the week because this is a chunky one. This is the kind of controller where all of the ergonomics and everything looks really good. You're gonna have to make your life wrap around this particular controller because, hey, maybe it's just that good, but this is an Xbox controller through and through, which is the best thing I can say about this controller, because being someone that plays PC with an Xbox controller for as long as I can remember it, this controller feels right at home when using it on my phone. Yeah, feels kind of weird to say phones plural, but this is a life that I choose. Anyways, for anyone that is used to the Xbox layout, this controller will feel fantastic because you are familiar with the layout and you know what the controls are. For someone that's used to the PlayStation layout, then it really won't be that bad because it's the analog stick placement that's different. In terms of the buttons, there's no compromise for this controller, so you have all of the buttons you would want. There's 4 face buttons, dual clickable analog sticks, start and select, or in this case I think it's the home and the share button. I am still not sure what the 3 lines mean, but most likely it's the home button. I think there's the Bluetooth button on the top next to the right trigger, which is analog by the way, so that's great for racing games and shooting games. Next to that is the toggle to switch for wireless charging. Yeah, wireless charging, because you have a beefy 2000 milliamp battery pack, which makes the controller lasts a really long time, but most likely will charge your phone really slowly and probably not that much juice, because most phones now are like 4 to 5,000 milliamp in terms of battery, so this isn't as much power. If you plan on replacing your power bank with this controller, I still recommend packing a power bank in case if you're planning on going on long trips. Since we're looking at the top of the controller, by far the most disappointing thing is that micro USB port that is used to charge the controller and plugging in if you want to use the controller for Windows. So the ultimate question remaining is, unless there's already an answer, and if there is, I'll post it as an update in the description below the like button, the link to buy the controller below. Tangent aside, does the controller get charged when using it on a PC as a controller? Because when I plugged in the controller to use on the PC, I see all of the lights lit up, which makes me think it's also charging the controller as well. If that is the case, I recommend not using it for PC because the battery gets charged all of the time if you're planning on using it as a wired controller. If your PC has Bluetooth and you're using it wirelessly, then I don't think it should be a problem. Moving on to the back of the controller, you have two buttons that you can macro because there's the green button at the bottom of the controller for you to press and reprogram those two buttons to act as the buttons that you like. So in some situations this can be useful, but most of the time because of how low the buttons sit, I cannot find a situation where it would be useful. If you do, comment down below and let me know. Besides the green button on the bottom, there's also the USB and Bluetooth button, which you can switch on the fly. In some cases, the switch kind of acts like an off switch if you're moving from Bluetooth and if you want to turn the controller off. One thing I noticed is that the handlebars are kind of small, but then it clicked the moment when I put the controller in my pocket. So the handlebars are small on purpose because when the controller is stretched out, most of your hand will go to the side because of how you're trying to balance the controller while it's in your hand. So when you're holding the controller, the smaller the handlebars actually work better than that I initially thought when I was planning on using the controller during my initial impression. There's also the battery button, which I find very useful because you can always check to see when you need to charge it at or when your charge is at, which is nice. I think all Bluetooth controllers should have this feature. The face buttons feels great. They're actually very tactile, there's a decent travel to them, and they make a sound when you press on them. D-pad's also really good because it is precise. There's easy moments when you pivot. So, like doing the Hadouken move is pretty easy with the D-pad, and playing shooting games on it that's using the D-pad only. I play PS1 shoot 'em ups that only use the D-pad, and the experience is great. Like, this has got to be one of the best, if not the best experience that I have with the D-pad so far in my video game controller reviewing career, if you can even call it that. The R1 and L1 at first feel kind of stiff, but over time gotten softer, or it's just me getting used to it. But I feel like it's gotten a lot better now, and are much more fun to use now because on the PS2 emulators, I still use the R1 and L1 as the main buttons to shoot and aim down the sight. For the R2 and L2, they used to feel really stiff when I first used them, to the point where it's like I almost wanted to just kind of give the controller back because it kind of reminds me of the Rig MX controller, and that controller with the R2 and L2 never really broke in for me, so they remain really stiff. Lucky for me, the R2 and L2 on this controller did break in, so it feels much better and softer now. The analog sticks feel kind of rough with the design of the sticks because of how the controller is. The new texture on the stick is really sharp. It does hurt your thumb as I originally used it as. I do believe over time the stick will smooth itself out with more usage. As for the two macro keys on the bottom, if I don't press them on purpose, I would never notice them, which is great because they do not get in the way if you don't want to set up macros. If you do want to set up macros, that could be an issue if you're planning on using them a lot. In terms of feeling out the controllers, this is the best controller that I've ever felt on my hand so far in terms of an Android controller. So we're not talking like Xbox One good kind of feeling here, but we're talking pretty freaking close considering the fact that this thing is modeled after the Xbox One. Everything feels so good to the touch. The face buttons are very tactile. They're soft, clicky, tactile. That's the exact kind of combination that you would want in a controller. The L1 and R1 buttons also feel soft, clicky, tactile. The R2, L2 are linear as they're supposed to be, or at least the way how you want them to be, which is great for racing games. The analog sticks have a perfect amount of resistance to it. Not too loose, not too tight, just a good amount of movement. Very, very similar to that of a PlayStation controller or an Xbox One controller. The only sort of downside is the D-pad. The D-pad, it looks kind of chunky. It feels kind of chunky, but it's not really all that bad. You can still do the Hadouken move pretty easily. The D-pad overall is very soft to the touch. It's also tactile in each direction. You also don't get that really weird mushy feeling that you get with other D-pads. How, you know, when you press right, it actually goes right down or right up. This one is a little more precise than that, but it's not as precise. So we're not talking like top of the line Nintendo Switch. No, not the Nintendo Switch. The top of the line sort of like cross D-pad that you see on something like the GameServe controller. We're not talking that kind of D-pad, but we're talking something that's relatively close, maybe just a little bit under the Xbox One controller in terms of D-pad preciseness and accuracy. It's a little bit under that Xbox One controller. And the handlebars on the controller feels great. It feels very smooth to the touch. Also, you have the back is made out of this like coating material where there's a bunch of freaking stripes roller, and the grip feels great. This is a very strong, grippy controller where you can sit down and play this thing for like hours on end and not get fatigued, which is exactly something that a sort of gamer-ish super fan gaming person, I don't know what I'm saying anymore, would look for. But if that's you, if that particular person sound like you and that's who I am, this is the controller that actually feels so freaking good to the touch. And yes, everything about this just feels fantastic to the freaking touch and feels. And in terms of latency, everything works as it's supposed to, because this is a $80 controller. This is $20 more than the GameSir controller, $30 more than the GameSir Bluetooth controller. So you're paying $30 more for essentially really good face buttons, really good analog stick, and also linear L2 and R2 button. You're also paying $30 more for a chunkier controller. Not going to be as portable, not going to be as pocketable, but you're basically trading off ergonomics, function, and fun to use over portability. So that's basically what you're trading off, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, in terms of latency, everything does work. Everything works as how they're supposed to work. And of course, you can feel safe playing a platformer with this controller, because I did. I did not run into any issues. I did not run into any rage quit moments where I want to chuck the controller out the window along with my folding phone, waste a bunch of money, and hopefully get a good warranty on that folding phone, because if you don't have warranty on your folding phone, you're kind of screwed. But anyways, nevertheless, it does not happen because this particular controller has good latency. In terms of things working, they work great. In terms of, is it better than the Type-C connecting automatically? I don't know, because honestly, I cannot tell a difference. I used the G-Skill controller with the USB Type-C. I used the Razer Kishi with the USB Type-C. And then I also used Bluetooth controllers. And honestly, to my plain old casual Asian eyes, I cannot tell the difference between a USB Type-C connection and a Bluetooth type connection, because they all just kind of work. You push a button and it does something. You push a button and it does something. So that's pretty much it in terms of latency. Because it's a Bluetooth controller, first, I think we gotta talk about the latency for the most part. The latency here is really good. I did not notice the lag when using the controller, but I do notice a slight difference when I switch to something like the Razer Kishi V1. The Razer Kishi V1 is more responsive than this controller in Bluetooth mode, because it's hard to explain it unless you know. If you don't, then you will not be able to tell. For me, it's not that big of a deal for latency. If you really care about latency and you're doing like pro level gaming, then I highly recommend using the USB function on the controller. If I plug the controller in and switch to USB mode, then I don't notice that difference anymore. If I switch to my Razer Kishi V1, to be honest, I think most people is going to be okay with this controller, because there isn't much in terms of latency, but to some they are going to feel like they're underwater when I'm playing the game. So for those that feel a big difference, I recommend just plugging the controller up when you play. If you have a folding phone, then you have a great advantage, because you can use the controller plugged in, and it's so portable because you place the phone in a way where the USB port sticks up and you can plug the controller in and play without having to worry about input lag. I mean, it's not going to look pretty. Then again, you have a giant phone screen and a giant controller, so you're gonna stand out either way. So I say roll with it. In terms of the clamp, it does a very good job of holding the phone in, especially because there's these little rubber pads, and then there's also these sort of like phone stopper, I believe that's what you call them, where apparently based off of my particular folding phone, it just fits perfectly nestled in. It's like as if this particular controller is made for the folding phone. I honestly kind of think so. Yeah, either way, you put them vertically or you put them horizontally, it both fits very well. When you do vertically, especially when you're playing DS game, it can be very, very top heavy because of just how much the phone sticks out comparing to what the clamp does. So yeah, you kind of want to watch out for that. But if you put the phone horizontally, it feels like it's a much better fit, but then again, it still sticks, like half of the phone will just stick out, like the whole half of the phone will stick out like a sore thumb. But hey, it still seems like it's relatively well compared to how well it holds the phone together. It's not gonna fall down on you because of the little piece of plastic. It might fall up on you, but then again, I feel like these little grips on the clamp, they do a pretty good job. And then because they're rubber pieces, they're gonna not have the phone scratch on the sides. But let's be honest, most likely you're gonna put a case on this phone anyways when you put it on the controller. But either way, if you're the kind of person that swings with a skin, you don't have to worry about your phone getting scratched on the sides because they have these little rubber pieces to sort of protect the phone. And in terms of the phone, in terms of the clamp, you gotta really watch out here because this only does 6.7 inches. I think a Note 20 Ultra is gonna be 6.9 inches, and then you slap a case on it, which makes it at least 7 or 7.2 inches, depending on how big the case you want to play it as. So most likely, it's probably not gonna fit. Or you can do the thing where it's kind of a stretch where you kind of put the phone not really in the controller, but on the controller, and kind of have both of the sides clamping it down as you hold the phone in, and kind of jerry rig it that way to make it work. That can also be fine for those of you that have like a regular candy bar slab controller. Just know that this only does 6.7 inches in the best fitment possible. In the worst fitment possible, if your phone is longer, you might just have to jam the damn thing in there just to kind of get it in right. If not, it is what it is. If you have a folding phone, or at least a Fold 3 so far, where all of the dimensions just kind of worked out with this particular controller, where horizontally it works well, vertically it works well. For a folding phone with this particular controller, I think it's a great setup. And yeah, if you don't have a folding phone, just keep in mind 6.7 inches. It's got to be around there. If it's a little bit higher with a case, it's probably going to be a tight fit. If you have a folding phone, then this looks fantastic. It holds the phone together really well. There are these soft cutouts that the rubber will hold together without scratching the side phone. Also, I'm pretty sure most of you would rock a case with your phone, so this would be great, as I'm sure most the controllers would just fit fine. I used the Poco X3 Pro with a case that comes in the box, and it fits is fine. That's a 6.7 inch phone, and there's only a tiny bit of room to move the phone around about. I have the phone placed in the controller, so I think for those that have larger phone, like a 6.9 inch or bigger, are probably going to have a problem after you put the case on your phone, because with a 6.7 inch and a case, it barely fits it with little room to move, so it's something to watch out for. For those that have a folding phone, I think you should be fine. I have a Fold 3 that's a 6.2 inch phone, and I was able to make it fit with a decent amount of room left over, so I would say folding phones are fine unless you have something like the Vivo X Fold. I'm sure how that would fit because it's a 6.5 inch undercover display, so I think you may or may not be out of luck, and I'm not rich enough to try it out. But if you have the phone and this controller, comment down below. Let me know what your experience is. Also, in case if you're wondering, phone sits fine in DS mode for both folding phone and normal phone, but normal phone might be a stretch if you have something like the Xperia. Putting the phone in DS mode might barely hold the phone unless you have a really thick case. That could be a different story. Honestly, when it boils down to it, both controllers have their own merits, but with the Moga xp7-x Plus, it's just a shorter controller overall, and the handlebars are not as long, which just make it more portable, and also you can use it without having Bluetooth. So in case if your battery does run out, you can just plop in the USB micro, not USB-C, micro USB, and then plug it into the phone and it plays, especially if you have a folding phone like me. Both controllers do feel top heavy, although the Moga does not feel as top heavy because of just the way how the phone sticks out. There's more room in the phone clamped in rather than room with it not as clamped. So you have that going for you, which is nice. Both controllers have standard layout, and overall, because of how the buttons of the Moga is, it's just more tactile. It feels more fun to use, and I can tap it longer than with the Nikon without going through finger fatigue. But then again, both controllers in terms of finger fatigue is really low. Like, you can use it for a long time without having finger fatigue, which is nice. The Moga does have wireless charging, even though it's only 2000 milliamp and the battery runs out quicker than you think, but it does have that feature, which is nice. And then also a very underrated feature, which is a button where you can tap on it and you can find out instantly how much battery you have left. I think the feature is so underrated, but I honestly think it's one of those features where every Bluetooth controller should have it. Like, they should have a button where you can just figure out, okay, what battery percentage am I at, or how low or how much battery I have left. I think that's a very useful feature. And then also the Moga controller also has macro button, which I don't personally use that as much, but if you do, that's great because you have the option to use macros. And on top of that, in terms of the feel, I have to say the Nikon does feel better with the longer handlebars, but it does feel more top heavy if you're using a folding phone. If you don't use a folding phone, I think that Nikon overall will feel better because of just how long it is, so it feels more balanced in the hands. First is the Moga, where it's shorter, it doesn't feel as balanced, but with a folding phone, the Moga is just overall better comfort in terms of ergonomics and the feels. In terms of right trigger, left trigger, I would say the Nikon feels better than the Moga. Because the Moga, honestly, even though the controller has been broken in, it still feels really stiff sometimes. And there are certain times when I press the triggers and it just does not register. That's with Bluetooth. With wired, it does register, and also sometimes it doesn't. So it's kind of like half and half with the triggers. So there's that. And the R1 and L1 buttons, they feel softer on the Nikon, and they feel like it's easier to tap than with the Moga. The Moga doesn't feel as easily to tap as the Nikon, so there's that. And overall, the analog sticks on the Nikon, they have more resistance to it. They feel like they're more planted, while the Moga, they feel like they're more loosey-goosey than the Nikon. But then again, it could have just been the controller being broken into, so that is it as well. Overall, because of micro USB and not USB-C, I honestly think that can be a deal breaker to some people. That can be a deal breaker to a lot of people, actually. Because if all you have is USB-C, because let's be honest, most, if not all of our devices are USB-C, unless you're Apple. If you're Apple, you use Lightning ports and USB-C, and it's like, that's a whole nother world, so that can be something else. But if you don't use Apple, yeah, most likely you're probably USB-C everything. So it's like, with micro USB, it's just something to really think about. And then overall, for the price, because they're both $100, I have to say, if you want more bang for buck, I would say go with the Moga, because it's just, there's more features on it and you can use it more with wireless charging. If your phone ever does get low in battery, the feature is there, even though it's not as good, but the feature is there. But with the Nikon, it's all about ergonomics. So if you have a folding phone, it does feel top heavy, but if you don't have a folding phone, I feel like it's gonna work out well because of just how long and balanced the Nikon is compared to the Moga. So there's also that. But if it's my money, I'm going with the Moga just because there's more features and more bang for buck, which I think that's really good. And then it's just overall, I feel like it's a overall stronger controller than the Nikon in terms of my opinion. Of course, my humble opinion. Yeah, there you go. There's that. And that's what I feel like. So anyways, let me know how you guys feel. Do you guys want the Nikon more than the Moga? Comment down below. Let me know which one would you get if you have a folding phone or if you have a regular phone, because honestly, I think that makes a world difference in terms of which controller. So that also matters as well. Yep. So if you're new to the channel, click subscribe, the bell, thumbs up, comment for more content. You guys stay awesome.